So, life is a great journey. There's a lot of great happiness and joy, which can be fleeting. There's a lot of pain and suffering and agony. And a lot of times we learn more in our failures than in our successes. One of the greatest stories of survival that I've ever come across is this story that I ran into just a few days ago, again, about this Ernest Shackleton. And here's his picture. And some of the things that he went through with his crew are unbelievable, what they were able to endure and continue living. I mean, how long can someone go without sleep? How long can someone go without food or water or without seeing the light? Complete darkness. How long could you live on a ship? Could you live on a ship for 9 months or on an ice floe for 5 months? Just the suffering that was endured by these people, and they survived. All 28 of his crew members survived. So 27 plus Captain Ernest Shackleton. It's an incredible story. And with their ship aptly named the Endurance, there we learn great lessons. What did he do right? Of course, there was a decision probably made up front that to continue with their progress, continue with their objective when he probably should have turned around. But we learn many great lessons from his example of surviving this incredible ordeal. So in 1914, a long time ago, they set sail for Antarctica. They brought with them a team of dogs and plenty of supplies. And they planned to traverse the entire continent in the summer, crossing the South Pole in the middle. And this would have been done after preparing and exercising dogs while stationed at the edge of the continent during the winter. They never made it to the edge of the continent. But what happens next is one of the greatest survival stories that I've ever heard. He was, here's some pictures of the map and some of the things that they saw. But here they are after a few days, they got stuck in the ice floe, and the plan was to stay there until spring came and the things thawed out a little bit. But they were stuck in this ice floe with no radio, no satellite telephone, no GPS. All they had were their supplies, the dogs. Sectant is what they used for navigation, and 3 lifeboats. They actually lived on this ship for 9 months before the ice started to thaw and it started crushing the ship, and it actually sunk the ship. And then the best thing that they could do under Ernest Shackleton's guidance, they decided to set up camp, but only after trying to get to the edge of the ice floe by pulling their lifeboats, and they had the dogs helping. Maybe at that time they had already, because of lack of supplies, they had to, I hate to say it, had to shoot and kill and eat the dogs. Some of them. Anyway, terrible. Shouldn't have said that. But it became almost impossible to get across this ice floe. So they set camp, and they called it Patience Camp. It required a lot of patience. So, like I say, they lived on this ice floe for 9 months. And then the ice floe started to break up. And so they got into their lifeboats, and the nearest land was Elephant Island. And it took them 5 days to row to that island in very difficult seas. When they got to this island, Elephant Island, they set up a camp. There it shows them with their little portable stove and trying to make the best of things. But as he says here, yeah, each day was filled with anxiety, you know, with all that they were going through. And because of the leadership of Ernest Shackleton, they stayed, tried to stay positive and never gave up hope. Well, the captain knew that there was no way they would be rescued from this little elephant island. They had to go to the next island, South Georgia, where there's a whaling station. The problem is, it was 800 miles away across very difficult seas. And so they took one of the lifeboats and they did some additions to it. They made the hold in front of the ship, they reinforced it, put some canvas over the top so they could have some area to try to stay dry, which didn't happen. Um, but they tried to reinforce it so they could get across this ocean. They sailed 800 miles across the ocean in terrible storms. Matter of fact, there was a hurricane that was happening at the same time that they had to fight with, and also there was a large steamship that sank because of that large hurricane. And I didn't know they had hurricanes in the Arctic, but well, they made it. They got to this island after 17 days of rowing in just terrible conditions. Um, but it's very interesting as you see the progression of the decisions were made, the number of individuals that stayed with the captain. First, it was all 27 of them going together, and then most of the men were not in a physical condition they could continue. They stayed at Elephant Island, and only 5 other men and the captain went with him on the little rowboats. So he finally, after 17 days, he makes it. Him and the other 5 make it to this island, this South Georgia island. And the problem is they were off course. They landed on the opposite side of the island they needed to be on. Um, and so he knew what had to be done. So there was 6 in the little rowboat. He took with him. Again, the number of men were reduced. He took with him 2 of the strongest left men in the group and left 3 of the shore of this South Georgia island. It was very deep snow, and would have to hike over very treacherous terrain, over mountainous terrain. And it would take them 36 hours straight of hiking to get to the other side of the island. I don't know if you've ever tried to hike in very deep snow without snowshoes. It's very difficult. It takes all of your energy. I don't know if you ever, I've never even tried to do a physical activity for 36 straight hours. And this is after months of just being totally depleted. The interesting thing is he made the best decision he could in each situation. And being totally depleted, he couldn't do it alone. He said something very interesting. And he says he noticed throughout his journey that he felt like there was someone else there with him. Well, let me back up. So they do eventually get to this village, this whaling station, and they're greeted by some of the locals there. They're offered a warm bath, and then they're given all of the biscuits that they had that they could eat. But then he reflects on the crossing of this mountainous terrain of 36 hours. not having anything else to give other than he knew what he had to do. And if he didn't do it, no one else could do it, and all of his men, all 27 men, would die. And he says, when I look back at those days, I have no doubt that Providence guided us not only across these snowfields, but across the storm white sea that separated Elephant Island from our landing place in South Georgia. I know that during that long and racking march of 36 hours over unnamed mountains and the glaciers of South Georgia, it often seemed to me that there were four, not three. I said nothing to my companions on that point, but afterwards, one of the other men, Worsley was his last name, said, Boss, I had a very curious feeling on that march that there was another person with us. And the third guy, Crean was his last name, confessed to the same idea. Shackleton then continues in his words and he says, one feels the dearth of human words, the roughness of mortal speech in trying to describe things intangible. But a record of our journey would be incomplete without a reference to the very subject near to our hearts. So it is. Every epic story has this element. When all seems lost, providence, heaven moves in. Matter of fact, Frank Worsley, one of the three in that group, said, and this was writing 7 years after the fact, each step of the journey comes back clearly. And even now, again, I find myself counting our party, Shackleton, Crean, and I, and then who was the other? But of course, there were three. But it was strange that in mentally reviewing the crossing, we should always think of a fourth and then correct ourselves. 3 or 4 weeks after arriving at Stormness, which is the city in that South Georgia island, Sir Ernest and I compared notes and found that each had a strange feeling there had been a fourth in our party. Heaven sends the help when you've done everything that you possibly can. There is a fourth person that will show up to help you complete your journey. How did they do it? How did Ernest Shackleton guide all 27 of his men to safety and to rescue and to survive this tremendous ordeal? Basically comes down to one thing. He made the best decision he could in each situation. And then he stuck to it until that information changed and he knew he had to do something different. He decided to stay on the ship and wait till spring. That didn't work out. He decided to wait on the ice floe. That didn't work out. Then he took the boats to this island. He knew that wasn't a long-term plan. He progressed every step of the way, making the best decision possible. And he only took 5 men with him on that final leg of the journey for rescue. Make the best decisions possible in life. And by doing so, you open the windows of heaven. It's a pattern, it's a recipe. Do your best, heaven will notice and send help in finishing what you cannot finish on your own. Sometimes you'll need that help. And other times, you'll be that fourth person, an angel sent from heaven to help someone that cannot do something on their own. Live your life so you can be that angel. Accept that help when it is sent. What a tremendous story of survival and how heaven assisted those that could not do it for themselves.